The escape pod screamed through the atmosphere like a dying star. Inside, Owen Cross gripped the harness straps as metal groaned and buckled around him. Red emergency lights painted everything in blood, while alarms shrieked warnings he already knew too well. His ship was gone. His crew was gone. And he was falling toward a planet that looked like 3 suns had beaten it into submission. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Metal crumpled. Glass shattered. Then silence, broken only by the hiss of leaking coolant and his own ragged breathing. Owen tasted copper in his mouth and felt warm blood running down his temple. His left leg screamed pain when he tried to move it. Broken, definitely broken. He fumbled with the harness release and dragged himself through the smoking wreckage into hell itself. Heat hit him like a physical blow. 3 suns hung in a bronze sky, turning the endless sand into a sea of fire. The wind carried no moisture, only grit that stung exposed skin. Owen's survival training kicked in automatically. Find shelter. Assess injuries. Salvage supplies. Avoid panic. He pulled himself upright using a twisted piece of hull, his broken leg dragging uselessly. The emergency kit had survived, along with 4 water containers and his medical pouch. Enough for maybe 5 days if he rationed carefully. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in this dead place. Chirping high and desperate like baby birds crying for food. Owen froze, listening. There it was again, coming from behind a massive sand dune about 50 meters away. Every instinct told him to ignore it, to focus on survival. But curiosity was a very human trait, and it pulled him forward through the burning sand. The second crash site was worse than his own. The Scorn vessel had hit at a steeper angle, tearing itself apart across 100 meters of desert. Owen recognized the design immediately. He'd been fighting the Scorn Empire for 3 years now. They were humanity's greatest enemy. Reptilian warriors who showed no mercy in battle. Their ships were fast and deadly, their soldiers nearly unstoppable in close combat. And inside the broken hull, surrounded by destroyed equipment and the cooling body of what must have been their mother, 4 tiny creatures huddled together and cried. Owen stared at them. Baby dragons. That's what they looked like, though he knew the Scorn were far more complex than Earth legends. Each hatchling was barely larger than a house cat, covered in scales that shimmered different colors. One was silver, one copper-colored, one black as obsidian, and one had scales like pale pearls. They had small wings folded against their backs, long tails, and eyes that were far too intelligent for newborns. The smallest one, the silver hatchling, looked directly at Owen and chirped again. It was a plea, a desperate call for help. Owen knew what he should do. These creatures would grow into the warriors who had killed so many of his friends. They were the enemy. Leaving them here would be strategically sound. No one would blame him. No one would even know. But Owen couldn't move. He stood there staring at 4 helpless babies who would die slowly in this heat without water or protection. Their mother's body was already starting to decompose in the extreme temperature. They didn't understand that. They just knew they were scared and alone and dying. Owen cursed quietly, a habit his mother had always scolded him for. Then he pulled himself through the wreckage toward the hatchlings. They shrank back initially, making small hissing sounds that would have been threatening if they weren't so obviously terrified. Owen moved slowly, keeping his hands visible, and pulled out one of his water containers. He poured a small amount into his cupped palm and held it out. The silver hatchling approached first, sniffing cautiously, then lapping at the water with a small forked tongue. The others followed quickly, pushing against each other in their desperation to drink. Owen gave them small amounts, knowing too much at once would make them sick. They were dehydrated and starving, their scales dull and skin tight against small rib cages. He found what looked like emergency rations in the Scorn wreckage. The packages were sealed but undamaged. Owen opened one carefully and found something that looked like dried meat mixed with herbs. He offered a small piece to the copper-colored hatchling. It sniffed, then gobbled the food eagerly. Soon all 4 were eating from his hands, their earlier fear forgotten. Owen sat back against the hull and assessed his situation honestly. He had a broken leg, limited supplies, no communication with friendly forces, and he was trapped on a desert planet with 3 suns and no visible shelter. And he'd just adopted 4 baby enemy soldiers who would need constant care to survive. It was possibly the stupidest decision he'd ever made. But as the silver hatchling climbed awkwardly into his lap and curled against his chest with a contented chirp, Owen felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years of war. Purpose beyond survival, connection beyond combat. He tore strips from his uniform to make a rough sling that would let him carry the weakest hatchlings. The copper one seemed strongest and could probably walk alongside him. Owen splinted his broken leg using debris and injected himself with painkillers from his medical kit. Then he checked his navigation device. There was a reading suggesting possible water sources to the northwest. Maybe 8 days' travel on foot with a broken leg, 8 days through hell, carrying enemy babies who would slow him down and drink his precious water. 8 days where any number of things could kill them all. The silver hatchling chirped again and nuzzled against his hand. Its scales were warm, almost hot to touch. Owen made his decision final. "All right then," he said to the small creatures who couldn't understand his words. "We're doing this together. You stick with me and I'll get us somewhere safe." He didn't know if that was a promise he could keep. But humans had this terrible habit of trying anyway. Sand stretched forever in every direction, broken only by rocks that radiated heat like furnaces. Owen had been walking for 2 days now, his splinted leg throbbing with each step. The makeshift sling across his chest held Silver and Pearl, the 2 weakest hatchlings. Obsidian and Copper walked beside him, though their small legs struggled in the deep sand. The heat was beyond anything Owen had trained for. His uniform was designed for temperature regulation, but the fabric was damaged and the power cell was dead. He'd removed the outer layer hours ago, wrapping it around the hatchlings to shield them from direct sunlight. That left his arms and neck exposed to the burning rays. His skin was already blistering despite the protective cream from his medical kit, but Owen kept moving. That's what humans did. They kept moving even when every cell in their body screamed to stop. The baby dragons suffered worse than him. Their species evolved on a temperate world with regular rainfall. This desert heat drained them rapidly. They panted constantly, their small tongues hanging out, eyes half closed. Owen stopped every hour to give them water from his precious supply. He barely drank himself, knowing they needed it more. His own throat felt like sandpaper, his lips cracked and bleeding. "Come on, little ones," Owen murmured, adjusting the sling. "Just keep breathing. That's all you need to do," Silver chirped weakly from the sling, pressing closer to his chest. The hatchling's scales had lost their shine, becoming dull gray. Owen felt its small heart beating fast against his skin. Too fast. It was overheating despite his best efforts. Owen scanned the horizon desperately. Nothing but sand and rock. No shade, no shelter. The 3 suns were reaching their peak position, the moment of maximum heat. He checked his temperature gauge. 138 degrees. The hatchlings wouldn't survive another hour in this. Think, Owen told himself. Use your brain. Humans survived because they adapted, because they found solutions where none seemed to exist. He spotted a cluster of large rocks ahead, tall enough to cast shadows. It wasn't much, but it was something. Owen pushed forward, dragging his broken leg through sand that burned even through his boots. Copper and Obsidian followed him faithfully, struggling in the deep drifts. When Copper stumbled, Owen scooped the hatchling up with his free arm, carrying it despite the added weight making his leg scream pain. They reached the rocks. Owen immediately positioned himself in the largest shadow and pulled out his emergency thermal blanket. It was designed to reflect heat or retain it depending on which side faced out. He draped it over the rocks to create a small tent, reflective side up. Then he gathered the hatchlings beneath it, using his body to block the gaps where heat could enter. It helped, but not enough. The temperature under the makeshift shelter was still above 100 degrees. The baby dragons lay panting, barely moving. Silver's eyes were closing. Owen recognized the signs. Heat stroke. Without intervention, the hatchling would be dead within minutes. Owen had one option left. He pulled Silver from the sling and held the small creature against his bare chest. Then he poured water over both of them, soaking his skin and the hatchling's scales. The precious liquid evaporated almost instantly, but that was the point. Evaporative cooling. Human bodies were designed for it. Owen's sweat glands kicked into overdrive, covering his skin with moisture. As it evaporated, it drew heat away from his body and from the hatchling pressed against him. It was working. Silver's breathing slowed, became more regular. Its eyes opened slightly, and it made a small sound of relief. Owen repeated the process with each hatchling, using his body as a living cooling system. He poured water over himself constantly, letting his human physiology do what scorned biology couldn't. His body temperature regulation was superior in extreme heat. It was killing him slowly, draining his fluids dangerously fast, but it kept the babies alive. Hours crawled past. Owen's vision blurred. His hands shook. Every movement felt like pushing through thick mud. Dehydration was setting in hard, but he kept pouring water over himself and the hatchlings, kept using his body as their shield against the deadly heat. Finally, mercifully, the suns began their descent. The temperature dropped degree by painful degree, 130, 120, 110. The hatchlings perked up slowly, their scales regaining some color. They made small chirping sounds and nuzzled against Owen's chest. Owen allowed himself to drink then, taking small sips from his last water container. He'd used 3 containers in 2 days. At this rate, he'd run out in 2 more days, still 5 days away from the possible water source. But worrying about tomorrow wouldn't help. Focus on now. That's how you survived. As darkness fell, the temperature plummeted. The desert went from furnace to freezer in hours. Owen pulled the thermal blanket around all of them, reversible side and now to trap heat. The hatchlings burrowed against him, seeking warmth. Their small bodies radiated cold now instead of heat. Owen wrapped his arms around them, sharing his body heat freely. Copper, the brave one, looked up at Owen with eyes that seemed to understand. The hatchling made a sound different from the others. Not a chirp or a cry, but something softer, almost like gratitude. Owen smiled despite his cracked lips. "You're welcome, little friend." He knew the next days would be harder. His leg was getting worse. His supplies were nearly gone. The hatchlings were growing rapidly, requiring more water and food each day. The smart thing would be to abandon them, to save himself. But Owen had learned something in 2 days of hell. Humanity's strength wasn't in being smart or logical. It was in being stubborn, in refusing to give up on those who depended on you, even when survival said you should. The hatchlings slept curled against him, trusting him completely. Owen stared up at the unfamiliar stars and made a promise to himself and to them. Tomorrow he'd walk again. And the day after, and every day necessary until they all reached safety, because that's what humans did. Blood dripped from fresh scratches on Owen's arms as he gathered dried brush in the fading light. Day 4 in the desert had brought new problems. The hatchlings were growing faster than he'd expected, already twice their original size. Silver now weighed nearly 15 pounds, and carrying 2 of them was becoming impossible. But that wasn't the worst problem. They were being followed. Owen had spotted the tracks that morning. 6-legged prints, each claw mark as long as his finger. Multiple sets of them, circling their camp from the previous night. His salvage scanner confirmed what his gut already knew. Rippers, native, predators that hunted in packs and could smell fresh meat from miles away. The baby dragons were like beacon signals to anything hungry on this dead planet. Owen worked quickly despite his exhaustion. He'd found a small canyon with high walls, the best defensive position for miles. Now he was preparing for what he knew was coming. He rigged his remaining flashbangs to tripwires made from equipment straps. Not enough to kill a ripper, but maybe enough to slow them down or scare them off. His plasma pistol sat on a rock beside him, charge indicator showing red. 1 shot left, just 1. After that, he had his combat knife and whatever he could improvise. "Stay close," Owen told the hatchlings as he worked. They understood tone if not words. Silver stayed pressed against his leg while the others huddled behind him. They'd learned to trust his commands completely. When he said stay, they stayed. When he said quiet, they went silent immediately. Smart little dragons, too smart to die out here. Darkness came fast in the desert. Owen built a small fire from the dried brush, knowing it would attract the rippers but also hoping it might deter them. Predators sometimes feared fire. Sometimes, he ate his last ration bar slowly, giving most of it to the hatchlings. They were always hungry now, growing bodies demanding constant fuel. Owen's own stomach had stopped growling days ago. Now it just ached with a dull emptiness he tried to ignore. The waiting was the hardest part. Owen sat with his back against the canyon wall, knife in hand, watching the darkness beyond the firelight. The hatchling sensed his tension and pressed close. Silver climbed into his lap despite being too big for it now. The weight was comforting somehow. The first ripper appeared at the canyon entrance just after midnight. It was massive, easily 8 feet long, covered in armored plates that gleamed in the firelight. 6 powerful legs ended in claws that could shred steel. Its head was mostly mouth, filled with teeth designed to tear and crush. Yellow eyes reflected the flames as it tested the air, smelling the hatchlings. Owen stood slowly, placing himself between the predator and the babies. His knife felt impossibly small in his hand. The Ripper growled, a sound like grinding metal. Then 2 more appeared beside it. 3 of them, maybe more in the darkness beyond. Owen's heart hammered, but his hand stayed steady. He'd fought Scorn warriors in close combat. He'd survived boarding actions and desperate last stands. But this was different. This was pure predator versus prey, and he was defending creatures that couldn't defend themselves. The lead Ripper charged. Owen triggered his first tripwire. The flashbang exploded with light and sound that echoed through the canyon. The Ripper howled and stumbled, temporarily blinded. Owen didn't waste the moment. He grabbed a burning branch from the fire and thrust it at the creature's face. The Ripper backed away, snarling, but the other 2 were circling, looking for angles of attack. They were pack hunters, smart enough to coordinate. Owen couldn't watch all directions at once. A Ripper lunged from the side. Owen spun, bringing his knife up, but the creature's claws raked across his ribs before he could fully dodge. Pain exploded through his side. Hot blood soaked his shirt, but Owen's counterstrike went true. His combat knife found the soft spot beneath the Ripper's armored jaw and drove deep into its brain. The creature dropped, twitching, 1 down, 2 to go, and Owen was bleeding badly. The remaining Rippers attacked together. Owen triggered his second tripwire, then his third. Explosions and light filled the canyon. In the chaos, Owen grabbed a sharp piece of scrap metal he'd positioned earlier and used it to block a snapping jaw. The metal bent but held. Then the lead Ripper got past his defense. Jaws closed on his left forearm. Owen felt bones crack. He screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain, and drove his knife into the creature's eye. The Ripper released him and stumbled back. Owen fell to one knee. Blood poured from his arm and ribs. His vision swam. The last Ripper circled, sensing weakness, preparing for the killing strike. This was it. Owen had nothing left. His arm was broken, his side was torn open, and the Ripper was fresh and hungry. But giving up wasn't in Owen's programming. He raised his knife with his good hand and prepared to make his last stand a memorable one. Then something impossible happened. The 4 hatchlings, who Owen had ordered to stay back, rushed forward as one. They opened their small mouths and released jets of flame. Not big flames, not enough to seriously hurt the Ripper, but hot and surprising. The predator yelped and jumped back. More importantly, the combined heat was intense. Owen felt it wash over him. The hatchlings were defending him the only way they could, using abilities that shouldn't manifest for months yet. The Ripper, burned and confused, decided these prey weren't worth the trouble. It retreated into the darkness, leaving its dead packmate behind. Owen collapsed against the canyon wall, trying to hold his torn side together with his good hand. The hatchlings rushed to him, making distressed sounds, pressing against him. "It's okay," Owen whispered, though it really wasn't. "You did good, so good." His medical kit was almost empty, but he found enough supplies to coat his wounds with sealant and wrap them tightly. The pain was incredible, but pain meant he was alive. The broken arm he splinted against his body, crude, but functional. Silver crawled carefully onto his chest and made a mournful sound. Owen managed a weak smile. "Still not giving up on you," he told the small dragon. Humans are stubborn that way. He'd lost a lot of blood. His arm was broken. His ribs were torn, but they'd survived. All of them. And tomorrow somehow Owen would find the strength to keep walking. Fever dreams mixed with reality as Owen stumbled forward on day 7. He couldn't remember if he'd actually seen water on the horizon, or if his damaged brain was creating mirages. His broken arm hung useless in its makeshift sling. The wounds on his side had sealed, but infection was setting in despite the antibiotics. He could feel the heat of it spreading through his body, different from the desert heat, more dangerous. The hatchlings walked beside him now, too large to carry. They'd grown to the size of medium dogs, their scales brighter, their movements more coordinated. Silver stayed closest, often pressing against his good side to help steady him when he swayed. They took turns making trips ahead to scout, a behavior Owen hadn't taught them. They were developing instincts, intelligence blooming faster than any growth chart would predict. Maybe stress accelerated their development. Or maybe caring for them, Protecting them, talking to them constantly had somehow shaped their minds faster. Owen didn't know. He just knew they were becoming more than simple animals. There was understanding in their eyes now, something almost like thought. He topped a ridge and stopped breathing. Below him, possibly, water sparkled in the harsh sunlight. A real oasis, not a mirage. Trees with strange purple leaves surrounded a pool of clear water. Rocks formations created natural shelter from the sun. "We made it," Owen croaked through his dry throat. "We actually made it." He half walked, half fell down the slope. The hatchlings rushed ahead, diving into the water with joyful chirps. They splashed and rolled, drinking deeply, their scales shining with moisture. Owen collapsed at the water's edge and just let himself fall face first into the cool liquid. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever felt. The water washed away days of blood and sand and suffering. Owen drank until his stomach hurt, then drank more. He stripped off his ruined shirt and let water flow over his infected wounds. It stung terribly, but he needed to clean them before the infection spread to his blood. For the first time in 7 days, Owen let himself rest. Really rest. He lay in the shade of the strange trees while the hatchlings explored their temporary paradise. His body finally had a chance to begin healing. The fever in his wounds would take days to fight off, but at least now he had water and shelter and time. Silver brought him something that evening. A small lizard creature, dead but fresh. The hatchling dropped it proudly at Owen's feet and chirped. A gift? Food. Silver had hunted for him. Owen felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, little one." He cooked the lizard over a small fire and shared it with the hatchlings, though they'd caught their own food throughout the day. They ate together as the sun set, a strange family bound by survival and something deeper than either species had words for. That night, Owen explored the caves near the oasis. He needed to understand this place to know if it was safe. The caves were deep and surprisingly cool inside. His flashlight beam caught something on the walls and Owen moved closer, squinting. Carvings. Ancient images carved into the rock by intelligent hands. Owen traced them with his fingers, trying to understand. There were creatures that looked like humans, and creatures that looked like Scorn, but they weren't fighting in these images. They were working together, building something, exploring. Owen's archaeological training from before the war kicked in. These carvings were thousands of years old. They showed cooperation, friendship even, between humans and Scorn. But that was impossible. The two species had been at war since first contact. Everyone knew that. It was historical fact, except these carvings told a different story. Owen spent hours studying the walls, his mind racing despite the fever. What if the war wasn't inevitable? What if it started from a misunderstanding, a lost communication, a single violent incident that spiraled out of control? What if both sides had been lying to themselves for so long that they'd forgotten the truth? His communicator crackled to life suddenly, making Owen jump. The device had been dead for days, its power cell drained. But here, near these rocks, it was picking up something. A signal. Multiple signals, actually. Owen adjusted the frequency and felt his stomach drop. Human military chatter on one channel, Scorn military chatter on another. Both sides were searching this sector, looking for survivors from the battle that had shot him down. They were close. Maybe a day away, maybe less. Owen looked at the hatchlings sleeping peacefully by the water. Silver's head rested on Copper's back. Pearl and Obsidian curled together nearby. They trusted him completely. They depended on him. If Owen signaled the human fleet, they'd rescue him. They'd also kill the hatchlings immediately as enemy combatants. It wouldn't matter that they were babies. War didn't make those distinctions. If he did nothing, both fleets might pass by without detecting the oasis. But Owen needed real medical care. His arm wasn't healing right. The infection in his side was getting worse despite the antibiotics. Without proper treatment, he might not survive another week. Save himself and let the hatchlings die, or stay hidden and risk dying slowly from his wounds. Owen looked at the ancient carvings again. Humans and Scorn working together before everything went wrong. Maybe it could be that way again. Maybe these 4 small dragons raised by human hands, protected by human sacrifice, could be the beginning of something new. It was probably foolish hope, but hope had kept Owen alive this long. He disabled the communicator's automatic beacon and settled down to sleep. Tomorrow he'd be stronger. Tomorrow he'd think more clearly. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to bridge a gap that centuries of war had created. Tonight he just needed to rest. Silver crawled over and curled up against his chest, warm and trusting. Owen wrapped his good arm around the small dragon and closed his eyes. "We'll find a way," he whispered. "Somehow we'll find a way." His fever dreams that night were full of images from the cave walls. Humans and scorn, building cities together under unfamiliar stars. Maybe it wasn't just a dream. Maybe it was a memory of what had been and a promise of what could be again. Owen held on to that hope as he slept, even as his body burned with fever and his wounds ached. Hope was a very human thing. Irrational, illogical, but impossibly strong. It had carried him through 7 days of hell. It would carry him through whatever came next. Owen woke to the sound of engines overhead. His fever-addled brain took precious seconds to process the sound. Aircraft, military grade. Coming fast. He stumbled out of the cave where he'd been sleeping, shielding his eyes against the bright morning light. 3 Scorn atmospheric fighters circled the oasis like predators. They'd found him. The hatchlings sensed the danger immediately. They gathered close to Owen, making low warning sounds. Silver positioned herself directly in front of him, small wings spreading in a protective gesture that would have been touching if it wasn't so futile. She barely came up to his waist, but she was ready to defend him. The fighters landed in formation, kicking up massive clouds of sand. Their engines wound down slowly. Then the hatches opened and 3 adult Scorn warriors emerged. Owen had fought Scorn before, but never this close without weapons or armor. They were terrifying. Each stood over 7 feet tall, covered in scales that looked like living armor. Their wings were full-sized and powerful, capable of limited flight. Claws on their hands could tear through steel. These weren't the babies Owen had been protecting. These were apex predators in their prime. The lead warrior, his scales darker and more scarred than the others, walked forward slowly. His eyes fixed on the hatchlings, then moved to Owen. Those eyes held intelligence and confusion in equal measure. "Human soldier." The warrior spoke in heavily accented but understandable English. "Explain this situation." Owen tried to stand straight despite the fever making him sway. His infected wounds throbbed. His broken arm hung useless. He was weak, unarmed, and facing 3 beings who could kill him with their bare hands. But he positioned himself between the warriors and the hatchlings anyway. "They're under my protection," Owen said, his voice rough but steady. "You want them, you go through me first." The lead warrior's eyes narrowed. "Those hatchlings are of the royal bloodline. They belong to our people. You will surrender them immediately." "No." The simple word hung in the air. The other 2 warriors growled, moving to flank Owen. The lead warrior raised a hand, stopping them. "You do not understand the situation, human. Those are children of Commander Sella. She was one of our greatest leaders. Her offspring must be returned to our people to be raised properly." "I found them dying next to her body," Owen said, 7 days ago. "I've kept them alive since then, fed them, protected them, carried them through a desert that would have killed them in hours." "Why?" The lead warrior stepped closer, his scarred face genuinely confused. "Why would an enemy soldier do this? What tactical advantage do you gain?" Owen laughed, a bitter sound. "Tactical advantage? Look at me, I'm half dead. I used my last supplies on them. I fought rippers with a broken arm to keep them safe. There's no tactical advantage. I did it because they were helpless babies who deserved a chance to live." The warrior studied Owen for a long moment. "You are delirious with fever. Your wounds are infected. You will die if you do not receive medical treatment soon." "Probably," Owen admitted, "but I'm not moving away from them. This is illogical. We are enemies. These hatchlings will grow to become warriors who may one day kill humans. You should have left them to die. Instead, you nearly died yourself to save them. Why, what possible reason could you have?" Owen felt his legs weakening. The fever was getting worse. He had maybe minutes before he collapsed, but he needed these warriors to understand. "Because it was the right thing to do," Owen said simply. "Because they were scared and alone. Because I couldn't walk away from babies who needed help, even if they belonged to an enemy species. Because that's what being human means. We don't just fight for survival. We fight for what's right, even when it costs us everything." The lead warrior's expression changed. Something shifted behind his eyes. "My name is Roth. I have fought humans for many years. I have always believed your species was weak, soft. You cry over small injuries. You cannot tolerate pain as we can. You lack natural weapons or armor. I thought these things made you inferior warriors. Roth looked at Owen's ruined body, held upright by willpower alone. At the hatchlings gathered protectively around the human's legs, had 7 days' worth of impossible survival written in scars and blood. I was wrong, Roth said quietly. You are not weak. You are strong in ways I did not understand. Owen's vision was fading. He could feel consciousness slipping away. Just promise me. Promise you'll take care of them. They're good kids. They saved my life when the Rippers attacked. They deserve. His legs gave out. Owen collapsed forward, expecting to hit the ground. Instead, strong hands caught him. Roth had moved with impossible speed to stop his fall. Medic! Roth barked to his warriors. This human requires immediate treatment. Full medical protocols. And contact the council. Tell them we have a situation that requires their urgent attention. Silver rushed forward, making distressed sounds. She tried to reach Owen, but Roth's warriors gently held the hatchlings back. Peace, little ones, Roth said softly, speaking in the scorn language that the hatchlings would instinctively understand. We will not harm your guardian. I give you my word of honor. Owen heard the words as if from a great distance. The scorn were carrying him toward their ship. Medical equipment was being prepared. The hatchlings were following, chirping frantically. Don't separate them from me, Owen managed to whisper. They'll be scared. They will stay with you, Roth promised. I swear it on my honor as a warrior. The last thing Owen saw before darkness took him was Silver's face, pressed close to his. Those intelligent eyes full of worry and something that looked remarkably like love. Then the fever claimed him completely, pulling him down into unconsciousness. His body had finally reached its limit. He'd used every last bit of strength to protect 4 small dragons through 7 days of hell. Now, for the first time since the crash, Owen's fate was in someone else's hands. He'd done everything he could. The rest was up to the universe, and to a scarred scorn warrior who'd just learned that enemies could sometimes be more noble than friends. White ceiling panels swam into focus above Owen's head. Not metal, not stone, something smooth and clean that spoke of advanced medical facilities. His body felt distant, wrapped in the comfortable numbness of strong painkillers. For the first time in 8 days, he wasn't hurting. The human awakens. Roth's gravelly voice came from beside the bed. Your timing is acceptable. The council gathering begins in 1 hour. Owen turned his head slowly. He was in a scorn medical facility. That much was clear from the equipment. His left arm was in a proper cast now, the bones set correctly. His ribs were wrapped in some kind of healing gel that tingled slightly. Heavy lines fed medicines into his veins. The hatchlings. Owen's voice came out as a croak. Roth gestured to the corner of the room. All 4 young dragons were curled together on a large cushion, sleeping peacefully. Silver's head lifted at Owen's voice. The small dragon chirped happily and scrambled across the room to press against the bed. Owen reached out with his good hand to stroke Silver's head. The dragon's scales were bright and healthy now, properly fed and hydrated. They would not leave this room, Roth said with something that might have been amusement. They stood guard over you for 2 days while you recovered from the fever. Our physicians had to work around them. 2 days? Owen tried to sit up, but his body protested. What happened? What council gathering? Roth settled into a chair, his large frame making the furniture look small. Your actions have created considerable discussion among our people, and yours as well. Both governments have sent representatives. Owen's stomach tightened. You told the humans I was here? We had no choice. Your sacrifice for our young was recorded by my ship's sensors. The footage was transmitted to our command as evidence. Within hours, it spread through both military networks. Roth's scarred face showed an expression Owen couldn't quite read. You have become somewhat famous, human. Or perhaps infamous would be more accurate. A screen on the wall flickered to life. Owen watched in growing disbelief as footage played. Him using his body to shield the hatchlings from the sandstorm. Him pouring precious water over them during the peak heat. Him fighting the Rippers with a broken arm. The images were clear, captured by orbital sensors and fighter cameras. Our people have watched this, Roth said quietly. They have seen a human enemy sacrifice himself to protect scorned children. It challenges everything we have been taught about your species. The footage switched to human news broadcasts. Reporters discussing the events. Military analysts trying to explain Owen's actions. Civilians calling for peace talks. The story had captured both civilizations. The human military wanted to retrieve you immediately, Roth continued. My people wanted to honor you for protecting royal bloodline. This created tension, so both governments agreed to a neutral meeting. Here, today, to discuss what your actions mean for our peoples. Owen looked at Silver, now joined by the other 3 hatchlings around his bed. I didn't do it to make a political statement. I just couldn't let them die. That is precisely why it matters so much. Roth stood looking down at Owen. Warriors understand strategy. Politicians understand negotiations. But ordinary beings on both sides understand compassion. You showed them that enemies can choose mercy over hatred. The door opened and 2 human officers entered, along with several Scorn officials. The room suddenly felt much smaller and more tense. The senior human officer, a gray-haired woman with Admiral's insignia, approached the bed. Combat Medic Owen Cross, your actions have created a unique situation. I was just trying to survive, ma'am. You were trying to protect enemy young at tremendous personal cost, she corrected. The footage has been seen by billions on both sides. Public opinion is shifting rapidly. People are asking why we're fighting a war against beings capable of honor and family bonds, against beings who care for their children as much as we care for ours. A Scorn official stepped forward, his scales a distinguished silver blue. The hatchlings refuse to be separated from you. Our xenobiologists suggest they have imprinted on you as a parental figure. This has never occurred across species before. Silver chirped and pressed closer to Owen as if understanding the conversation. The other hatchlings watched with intelligent eyes. What does this mean for me? Owen asked. For them? The human admiral and Scorn official exchanged glances. Some agreement had already been reached. Both governments propose a new position, the admiral said. Cultural liaison and guardian. You would live in a neutral zone being established as a joint colony. The hatchlings would remain with you as you raise them. You would work to bridge understanding between our species. Owen looked at each of the hatchlings. Silver, brave copper, cautious obsidian, gentle pearl. They'd survived hell together. They trusted him completely. And the war? Owen asked. Historians have confirmed what you discovered in the cave, the Scorn official said. Our species were allies thousands of years ago. The war began from a misunderstanding that grew into hatred. Both sides perpetuated it because we forgot how to stop. The footage of you and the hatchlings is forcing both militaries to remember something important, the admiral added. Before we are soldiers, we are thinking beings capable of compassion. Peace talks are being arranged. It won't be easy or quick, but for the first time in generations, there's real momentum. 6 months later, Owen stood in the central plaza of the first joint human Scorn colony. Silver, now the size of a horse, stood beside him. Her siblings were nearby, all growing strong and healthy. Around them, humans and Scorn worked together, building something new. A human child approached, maybe 7 years old, looking up at Silver with wide eyes but no fear. Mr. Owen, my teacher said you were alone in the desert with the baby dragons. Were you scared? Owen smiled and placed his hand on Silver's scaled head. The dragon rumbled contentedly. Every single day, Owen admitted. But being human means you keep going anyway, even when you're scared, even when it hurts, especially when someone needs you. Fear doesn't make you weak, it makes courage possible. Silver leaned her great head down to the child, who reached out to touch her scales with wonder. A Scorn child approached from the other side, equally curious. The 2 children, human and Scorn, stood together petting Silver and asking Owen questions about the desert. This was what Owen had nearly died for in that wasteland. Not politics or strategy, but simple connection. The recognition that life was precious regardless of what form it took. The war would take years to fully end. There were hardliners on both sides who didn't want peace. But every day, more people saw the footage of one human refusing to abandon 4 helpless babies. Every day, more people asked themselves what they were really fighting for. Owen still had nightmares about the desert sometimes. About the heat and pain and desperate struggle for survival. But when he woke, Silver would be there, pressing her head against his shoulder. The nightmares couldn't stand against the reality of what they'd built together. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't weapons or technology. It was the stubborn, illogical, beautiful refusal to let compassion die even in the face of war. It was the choice to protect those who needed protecting, even when every logical reason said you shouldn't. Owen had learned that in 7 days of hell. Now 2 civilizations were learning it together, and for the first time in centuries, the future looked bright.